Hey everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel if you're new, or welcome back if you're a returning subscriber. So today's video is going to be similar to another video that I've done. I did a grammar passage walkthrough for a practice test 7 grammar passage. So a lot of you guys really enjoyed it, and a lot of people on my TikTok lives have been requesting that I do more of these grammar passage walkthroughs. So you ask, of course, guys, and I deliver. So today we're going to be doing a practice test 9 grammar passage. We're going to be categorizing the questions, talking about what considerations to have for each type of question, all of the grammar rules that you would need to know, and so on. So without further ado, let's jump into today's video. All right, so let's begin with question 34. So question 34, if we had to categorize what type of question this is going to be a revision question, because we can see that the question says the writer is considering revising the underlined portion to the following. So what I first want to point out is that in the paragraph, we see that it just says the word cities, and then in the actual question, there's cities with some extra information attached. Cities by excavating artifacts that have accumulated over centuries of land development. So when it comes to revision questions, here's at least how you want to tackle the yes or no part should you make the revision. So what you want to remember is that we want to be more specific. So it will pretty much always be the choice that has more information in it that's going to be the more specific choice that we are looking for. So because the question, the version in the question, has more information and is more specific than the version that's currently in the passage, we do want to go ahead and say, yes, we want to make this revision. So automatically we'll knock out C and D. And now let's see which one actually makes sense in terms of the reasoning. So they tell us right over here that Loria, an urban archaeologist, studies the history of cities, and then if we said, yes, we want to revise to this, it would say, by excavating artifacts that have accumulated over centuries of land development. So that's basically telling us how she works, how her process kind of works. So choice A, we can see reads as yes, because it helps set up the rest of the passage by explaining what urban archaeologists do. So it definitely does. It tells us that urban archaeologists excavate artifacts that have accumulated. So A sounds good. Squiggle that. B says yes, because it identifies the characteristics that make particular cities worthy of study. Well, it doesn't say certain cities should have, I don't know, rich history, a water supply, these kinds of buildings. It doesn't say anything like that, the properties of cities that would make them worthy of study. So it can't be choice B then. The only one that makes sense has got to be choice A. So just remember, in terms of the yes-no, we pick the yes-no determined by which one is more specific, the one in the paragraph or the one in the question, and then we just see which one of the remaining 2 options is going to make logical sense given what it's saying. Alrighty, let's then check out question number 35. So in terms of what kind of question this one is what we call a subject-verb agreement question. So I'll explain what we mean by subject-verb agreement in a second. Alrighty, so subject-verb agreement is basically the idea that you need to pair a singular subject with a singular verb and a plural subject with a plural verb. Let me give you an example. So if we say Jackie blank funny, hopefully you guys think I'm funny. I try my best. You would say Jackie is funny. You cannot say Jackie are funny. So the reason why you have to say Jackie is funny is because Jackie, myself, I'm a singular subject, so you have to pair that with a singular verb. On the other hand, if you wanted to say something like Jackie and Josh, you wouldn't say Jackie and Josh is funny. At this point, you would say Jackie and Josh are funny, because is would be singular, and Jackie and Josh as a subject refers to the 2 of us, so that's a plural subject, so we have to pair that with a plural verb. So subject-verb agreement is just about making sure that the subject and the verb agree in terms of the quantity presented, singular, singular, or plural, plural. All right, so let's try to identify what the subject is. So the SAT sometimes likes to make the subject a little bit difficult to identify. So let's talk about how to identify what the appropriate subject is. if you're ever in doubt, usually look at the first thing that comes up in the sentence. Not necessarily what's closest to the verb, but actually the first thing or the topic of the sentence that you're talking about. So the topic of this sentence is any New York City construction project. And yes, at the end it says using municipal funds, but that's just part of the construction project. So any construction project, well, project is a singular subject. So again, we don't really care about this part right here. This is just like extra information with regards to the subject, so we don't really need to look at that or get distracted. But you bet that they put something right before the verb that's actually going to be plural when the subject is actually singular to try to confuse you. So if you're ever in doubt, again, just make sure you're looking for the first thing that's mentioned in the sentence. That's usually what the answer is going to be. The topic of the sentence, the subject of the sentence. So project, let's see, any New York City construction project are required doesn't make sense because are is a plural verb. Any construction project have been required doesn't make sense because that's also a plural verb. Any New York construction project is required, that makes sense because that's a singular verb. Any New York construction project were required also doesn't make sense because that's a plural verb. So it's got to then be choice C to keep the singular subject project paired with the singular verb is. Alrighty, moving on to question 36. So for question 36, in terms of what kind of question this is a repetition question. So there's an easy way to do this, and not that the other way is hard, but it actually really requires that you know what's going on. So let me start out with the little trick first, and then we'll talk about why that makes sense. So if you notice in question 36, I'm going to do this in pink. All of the choices start out with the same word, which is exists. And we can see that choices A through C here have some extra stuff at the end, and then choice D just has the word exists with no extra information. Whenever you see this setup, 99.9% of the time, this is an indication that it's a repetition question because the choices that have extra fluff at the end are just going to be repeating something that's already in the answer choice or maybe has already been said in the paragraph. So that's why it then has to be choice D. But the real reason is because exists or is possible. It says possibility right here. Potentially. Necessary. We're already saying all of this stuff earlier in the sentence, so it's not necessary to say it yet again. But again, in terms of like just a quick little strategy, if you see they all start with the same word, pick the one that doesn't have any additional fluff at the end. Alrighty, looking then at question 37, this question is a transition word question. We can see that all of the choices are different transition words and they all mean different things. So let's check this one out. So previously, we got to read the previous sentence to kind of see what the passage is talking about so we can understand how the two sentences are going to relate to each other, the one prior to the transition word and then the one with the transition word. So the sentence prior says, it's our job to document and recover the history before it's lost. So that's talking about the scope of the project, the goal, that it's a really important thing to do. There's a lot of meaning to it. And then the sentence with the transition word says, as the work continued, the team faced obstacles. So before, it sounds like it's a really positive thing. It's a very big goal that they have. They're trying to do good things. But then they say, as the work continued onwards, the team faced obstacles, which is actually presenting as a negative thing when before, in the previous sentence, it sounds like they're doing very positive things. So we therefore need a word that's going to contrast, a word that's going to indicate that, things have changed, taken a turn for the worse. We need a contrast word, an opposite word, something of that nature. So therefore is cause and effect, so that's not opposite. Though is contrast, so that's going to work. Meanwhile is when you're saying like that something is happening like at the same time, like I was studying, meanwhile he was eating dinner. So no. And similarly is used when you are comparing two things. We're not comparing anything here, so the only contrast choice has got to be option B. Alrighty, number 38. So in number 38, what kind of question is this? We could see very generally speaking that this is just a punctuation question because the different choices have different types of punctuation. Like we can see this has a single dash, This has a semicolon, a comma, and then D doesn't have anything attached to it. Okay, so it's really important, guys, I cannot stress this enough, that you check the word that comes after the underlined portion. They're obviously not going to tell you to do that, and you might not think it's necessary because it doesn't seem like it's part of the question, but it really is necessary. So I made a bunch of TikTok videos actually recently on this. So the word by, the word that comes after the underlined portion here, is what we call a preposition word. And preposition words are basically just short relational words that help us to express the relationship between one thing and another. So examples of preposition words, I would screenshot this, write this down, however you got to get these in your head. Examples include words like in, on, to, at, by, from, with, things of that nature. And generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, on the SAT, we tend to not put punctuation in most circumstances with preposition words. So we rarely put punctuation with preposition words. So what that would mean then is that if we picked choice A, B, or C right here, we would be putting punctuation before the preposition word by. We don't want to do that, so the only choice that is not putting punctuation before the preposition word would have to be option D. Alrighty, let's then look at number 39. So number 39, this is basically a list question, and it's also a repetition question. So sometimes the question types will span multiple categories. I mean, what else would we expect, guys, from the SAT? They got to make our lives as fun and interesting as possible on test day. Am I right? All right, so let's check out what's going on here. So it says they had to contend with the noise of, and then if you can see right after they say noise of, they start listing off or rattling off what the noise was that they had to deal with. So the noise of, and the first thing they talk about is construction vehicles. The second thing that they had to deal with the noise of is car horns. And then the third thing is what we're trying to figure out right up here. So we don't need to say noise because they already said noise of before they initiated the list, which means that the noise of basically, I hate to think about this mathematically, but it's kind of like the noise of like distributes to each of the three terms in the list. It's like they're kind of like in parentheses and then noise of like distributes out to them. So to say noise or noise in A or B is going to be repetitive, and choice D is the same thing. Saying that of pedestrians, that is a pronoun that refers to the noise of pedestrians, so that would be repetitive because we've already established that before initiating the list. So the only choice that's not repetitive has got to be choice C to keep the list as it should be grammatically speaking. Alrighty, let's then check out number 40. So in terms of what kind of question this is also going to be a punctuation question. So here's something we need to know for the SAT. I've been talking about this a lot in my previous grammar videos. On the SAT, a semicolon and a period do exactly the same thing. A semicolon and a period are both used to link two full sentences. So whenever we see two choices, one of which has the same wording with a period, the other of which has the same wording with a semicolon, automatically we're going to knock them out because they're identical answer choices and we obviously cannot have two right answers. So automatically I could see that choice A says cite period including, choice D says cite semicolon including, so A and D, these are the same, so I'm going to go ahead and knock those out automatically. All right, so now we're looking at choices B and C. So choices B and C have the same punctuation. These both have a comma in them. So let's talk about what a comma does. So a comma, a single comma for that matter, is used to link one non-sentence with one full sentence. If you know a little bit about clauses, you might have heard of this called a dependent and an independent clause before, but if you haven't, you could just think of it as one non-sentence with one full sentence. So we need to make sure that that's what we're doing because one of the two remaining choices is going to be okay with that, the other one is not. So let's start out with choice B. So we can see previously in the sentence, it says, The archaeologists discovered thousands of objects in a single 15-foot stretch that was likely a garbage disposal site. Well, that is a full sentence. So that means that after it, if we're going to put a comma right here after site, we need to have a non-full sentence. But if we pick choice B, that would be saying among these were buttons from uniforms, clay pipes, and an imported mineral water bottle. Well, adding among these were adds a subject to this sentence, which makes this then a full sentence. And as we just said, if there are two full sentences, we're going to want to opt for either a semicolon or a period, but we are not going to want a comma, so it can't be choice B. It's got to be choice C, because choice C just says including buttons. There's no subject in there, so that's not going to be a sentence. So it is appropriate to link that with the previous part, which is a sentence. So you have a sentence, comma, and then non-sentence. So choice C is correct then. Alrighty, number 41 is, in terms of the question type, it is a set up question. So we have to set up the example that follows in the next sentence. So let's see what the example is in the following sentence here. So in the next sentence, it says, colonial era New Yorkers went to great lengths to secure fresh drinking water, given the effort involved in laying wooden pipes to bring in fresh water, digging very deep wells, brewing alcohol to mask the taste, and even importing bottled water. So basically they did a lot of stuff, put in a lot of work to try to get good drinking water for themselves. All right, so let's try to check out which choice would do that. So choice A says the various kinds of construction materials that were used. Well, not all of the terms in this list that they talk about right here mention construction materials. Digging very deep wells, they don't say what they did to dig them. Brewing alcohol, that's not really a tool for construction, so A is not going to make sense. Choice B says the numerous rituals associated with hospitality. Well, when you have good hospitality, that means that like you're like a good host, which has nothing to do with securing fresh drinking water, so B is going to be a no. C, public utility planning and infrastructure development. That is making sense because they're talking about all of the ways that they constructed their city and set up plans and initiatives in order to secure or bring in the fresh drinking water. So that involves planning and infrastructure. So C sounds good. Choice D is saying how they finance. They don't mention money, banks, bartering, anything of the financial aspect. So it can't be D. It's got to then be C. So process of elimination and, going through them, crossing out anything that sounds crazy, squiggling the maybes is how I like to best approach these questions. Alrighty, and question 42 is up next. This kind of question is a formality question. So whenever they ask you which choice best maintains the style and tone of the passage, the lights should be going off, the alarm's going off. This is a formality question. So when we're dealing with formality, we want to think of the choices kind of as being on a spectrum. And I've talked about this before. So over here we have slang or like informal words. Over here we have too formal. And then in the middle we have exactly what we're looking for, which is what I call the middle ground answer. So something that's like slang or informal, let me show you what that would consist of when we look at 42. Blood, sweat, and tears. Like, it's so dramatic, guys. Like, that obviously wouldn't work for the SAT. So that's going to be, no, that's informal. Hassle as well is like not a formal way of conveying that they had to put in a lot of work. So these two are going to be considered slang or informal. But at the same time, choice D, feats of strength and fortitude, is too formal. So we don't want that. So the only choice that's nicely our middle ground answer choice has got to then be choice A, which is just saying effort. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not too complicated. It's not undercomplicated. It's the perfect amount that we want. So choice A is correct. Alrighty, then let's check out number 43. We are almost done, guys, so good job staying with me. Question 43 is like a pronoun or like a specificity type of question. So let me give you a general rule of thumb. So we can see that choices A and B are both pronouns or like they're not specific. So they're not specific. And then choices C and D are very specific. So they're specific and they're actually the nouns themselves. So typically whenever you get this set up, you have a mix of pronouns and nouns. 99.9% of the time we prefer the noun because that actually allows us to be clear in what or who we're intending to refer to. So we're going to want to go ahead and knock out they and we because that's not really very specific. So then we have C and D. So it says, through such discoveries, blank tell the story of a city's history in a new way. And then they give a quote by Luria. So just as a reminder from the beginning, Luria, they tell us, is an urban archaeologist. So she's the one who's making the discoveries in this city. So let me go down here. Okay, so through such discoveries, it's not that the colonial era New Yorkers, they're not still alive to tell the tale is the point. It's that urban archaeologists like Luria are able to explain the city's history in a new way. So it's got to be choice D. And lastly, question 44. This is basically a conclusion question, just our standard sum up, wrap up type of question. So the writer wants to conclude the passage with a quote from Luria that illustrates the broad impact of her team's work. Which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal? Okay. So let's just review basically what she did. We might need to skim back a little bit because we've been reading, but not like fully reading. So that's what I like to do. I like to, read through it to have enough of an idea. But again, you don't have that much time. So reading through every single detail is probably not necessary until you approach a question like this one. So we're talking about the urban archaeologists and what they did. There was a construction crew. They dug things up, basically. Then it says that they uncovered interesting artifacts, a wall. They found objects. They found out about how they imported fresh drinking water. And then they were able to tell the story of the city's history. So let's look at choice A. One of my favorite things is putting together someone's life. Okay. Someone's life. Well, we were never talking about any one particular person here. It's more about the city of the history. It's more about the history of the city as an entirety. So it's not about one person's life. So that's not really going to be the point. New York City construction has a lot of starts and stops. Well, that's pretty random. That has nothing to do with like the fact that she's uncovering things from the past. So no. C, finding the bits and pieces that were used by the people in the past makes New York City's history real. That's what they're doing. She's an urban archaeologist. She finds out about the history from the past. So that's sounding pretty good. Wink, wink. Choice D, we call our archaeological technique monitoring. So you don't want to introduce a new term as the conclusion that you haven't used before. That's not really concluding. That's just introducing something else. So that's going to be a no. So choice C is correct. And that's a wrap for this grammar passage. Thank you guys so much for joining me for today's video. Hopefully you learned a lot about the SAT grammar section. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to give me a thumbs up and to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also make sure to follow me over on TikTok. Test Prep Tips is my username over there. I post daily videos and go live a lot on that account. And also, guys, just to let everybody know, all of the links for our SAT math workbook and our upcoming SAT crash courses are all linked in the description below. Thanks again for watching, guys. Take care.